Thank you. I haven't done a harbor seal talk that has anything to do with harbor seals for a good long time. I was just thinking, I was reflecting during the previous talks that exactly 30 years ago, I was working with Graham collecting harbor seal scats. I didn't want to talk to you about it without mentioning scats. Working with Graham and Peter Lesiak on a diet study of harbor seals. I've since moved on to work mostly on killer whales. This is actually a very easy talk for Andrew invited me to have a few extra minutes, which is fabulous. But there were so many talks that have set the stage for this that I think I'm done. I'm going to sit down. I think Strawn and Chad's talks were very helpful, and Zach and David and Simon. Thank you everybody for paving the way. I don't need to do this because we've done it already. The current population size is 74 animals for southern resident killer whales, as far as we know. It was at the end of September. And the key threats are outlined here, and I think well understood by this group. The single-minded dietary preference of resident killer whales for salmon is one of the things that made me so interested in this species many years ago. This focus on Chinook has been described already. They do take chum salmon as well, particularly in the fall months, and coho. This is probably coho here, when coho are around, but coho are relatively small. So there's no question really. I think that they're very dependent on Chinook. This is a figure from a paper that John and Graham and other colleagues did in 2009, and it was very game-changing in a way, this one, because it established for the first time that killer whales, resident killer whales at least, are up against a food ceiling, at least in some years. They've reached carrying capacity. You know, we kind of take that for granted now, but before that, we didn't have a clue. We knew that resident killer whale numbers, northern residents, had been going up for years and years and years. Transits had been bouncing around. We didn't really know if they were anywhere close to being at carrying capacity. So we've all changed our thinking, and it's been, I think that's one of the most important single developments really in the last 10 years in terms of understanding these populations. As has been mentioned before, I've been involved in a photogrammetry study for a number of years now, where we use a drone to take high-quality aerial images of killer whales, and then working with John and Holly, Dr. John Durbin and Holly Fehrenbach, and we're still collaborating very closely on the analysis. We're all too busy to spend 3 months a year in the field, so we split up our field efforts a bit. We'll still be comparing the northern and southern resident killer whale population body conditions every winter. On the left side of your screen here are a couple of southern residents and I want you to, this is J28 and calf, and I want you to pay attention to the size of that calf. It was born in 2015. On the other side, we have A75, a resident female, and her calf. Those calves are born in the same year. You can see a tremendous difference, not only in the body condition. You look at the southern resident side. You can see how skinny she is. We don't need to do any measurements to see that she's skinnier. We do a very complex set of measurements to capture the shape reliably. But she's thin, and no question about it. Look at her caudal peduncle right beside the head. And then A75 on the other side is fat and has that rotund calf with her. And this is something that we've seen, this difference between northern residents and southern residents, something we've seen pretty consistently. We began the study in 2014. This is a report of an independent science panel that attended a scientific workshop on southern resident killer whale health a couple of years ago, March 2017, actually, this one. Francis Gullen, Craig Matkin, and Michael Moore did this little report, and they looked at the evidence, the data that were presented to them at this meeting, and included a lot of the photogrammetry data, and agreed that with our assessment, and there was a panel of vets, Marty was there at this meeting, the vets generally agreed with the biologists, very unusual, that the killer whales really, the southern residents really were in poor condition and growing slowly. And this group concluded, as we had surmised, that this consistently poor condition is likely caused by prey limitation, compounded by things like noise and disturbance and contaminants, and possibly contaminants at least. So the reason I'm doing this talk today is because, as somebody who's been in the killer whale game for a while and being particularly interested in body condition and changes in body condition over time, I'm getting asked a lot, and I know some of other people here are too, about seal calls. Are seals a good way to save the southern resident killer whales? Seals eat Chinook. Surely if we kill a bunch of seals, we'll have more Chinook salmon, and southern residents will be better off. So I just thought, gosh, I'm tired of answering the question. So in my own way, so here I am, and I'll say it, try and get it out all at once. Of course, predator calls are always controversial, and there's a lot of emotion. We all have, all of us in this room, I think most people generally have strong opinions about when and whether culls should ever be performed, and what the probability of success is. Do we cull wolves to save caribou? Well, there's very, very divided opinions about these things. So I thought it'd be helpful to do a little matrix, a little table of. There are many, many complicated ways, of course, in which predator-prey interactions can be very complicated, mediated through third parties, through additional prey, additional predators. Most predators are, even the specialist predators are usually not entirely specialists. These things are complicated. So when would we expect a cull to work? And when we expect them not to work? Culls do work sometimes in some cases. It's not correct to say that they never, ever work. They fail when they benefit the prey's, or they can fail when they benefit the prey's competitors. You take a predator out, your prey species is expected to do better, except for less mortality anyway. But if its competitors, if it's living in a competitive world, its competitors do better, it may not help it at all. They can fail, culls can fail when they benefit other predator species. So if you take one predator out, another one compensates by moving in, and you're no further ahead. They can fail when they harm the predator's predator, and this is kind of an important one. If you've got a medium-sized fish that's struggling, you take out its predator, a large fish. If you take out a medium-sized predator, rather, fish species, say, to save a forage fish, a very small fish, that if there's a specialist predator for that species, it's going to decline. It doesn't have any prey anymore. You've killed them all, and so you have to become a serial culler. Valeria gave me that term earlier on. I thought it was a good one. Because then you're responsible for managing the population. You can't step back, or it's difficult to step back. Culls don't work very well when prey are bottom-up regulated, when really it's not predators that are controlling the population size anyway. And this is very often the case. And so generally they don't work as well when the food web is complex. They do work when the opposite of most of these things, when a cull doesn't benefit the prey's competitors or doesn't benefit other predator species and don't harm the species predators and so on. And generally they're more likely to work, of course, when prey populations are limited by top-down forces, by predators in general. Excuse me. And so they work generally, if they work at all, they're much more likely to work when you have very specialist predators and simple food webs. And I think you have to also be mindful of the fact that culls can have very positive short-term effects, but not necessarily long-term effects. Things can stabilize, compensatory factors can take place. So this is just basic, sort of predator-prey theory 101. Would seal culls help conserve Chinook populations, and thereby benefit southern resident killer whales? So if we look at the same matrix, we can see, well, it looks like on the failure side, a lot of the species that seals eat, and as you've seen today, a very small percentage of their diet is actually salmon, and even a smaller percent is Chinook salmon. Seals are taking a lot of forage fish of different species, and some of those, including herring, by the way, are competitors of Chinook smolts in particular when Chinook are young. So take out the seals, more competition for young fish. And when is the most critical period for salmon survival generally and salmon conservation? Early marine survival is key, right? So this is when fish come out of the rivers, the smolts come out of the rivers, they're hungry, they've got to eat, they don't have much time, and competition matters. These seal culls will benefit predator species, certainly like hake, for example, a big salmon smolt predator. This is something we were talking about 30 years ago, wasn't it, Graham? Nothing particularly new there. They would harm, seal culls would harm the predator's predator, in this case, Bigg's killer whales. Without a doubt, we've seen these big increases. Joan's talk was super helpful, I think, of the presence of big killer whales in the Salish Sea ecosystem. Why are they there? Well, we saw Strawn's talk and maps there showing harbor seal distributions. To a great extent, they're almost certainly there because of harbor seals. Take out the harbor seals, big killer whales go away. And so this is when you become a serial caller. Are prey populations bottom up or top down limited? In the case of Chinook, it probably depends at different times in their life cycle. So I'd sort of put this one in the middle, I think. We could talk about it more if we had more time. And the food webs, these marine food webs are very complex, and seals are certainly generalist predators, as we've seen. So really, it's not looking great for corals, I'm afraid. Much as I love the idea of being able to go out and solve the problem by squeezing a trigger, because I'm Canadian, you know, that's how we do things sometimes. But I genuinely don't think it would work. It would be an experiment that would be extremely distracting. Right now, we have a government that's motivated to try and conserve southern resident killer whales, spending money for once. It's starting to do the right things. I think the fisheries closures, sport fishing closures that DFO brought in last year were courageous. I didn't expect that would ever go through. And constantly focusing on harbor seal calls and whether that's going to save is just wasting our time. And then what about big killer whales? Well, their most important prey species, as we've seen earlier, are seals, the single most important one. The population of big killer whales is not, big killer whales are still at risk. So they're still listed as threatened. They're recovering, but they're listed as threatened. So really, do we take the prey species of a threatened species and annihilate it? I don't know. I don't think that would pass the red face test. The use of the Salish Sea by transients has increased greatly, as I mentioned, and that's as I said, probably in response to seals. This isn't really anything to do with biology, but even from an economic point of view, you've got a big whale watching industry that's spending a lot more time watching transient killer whales or big killer whales than it is watching residents now, as we've also seen. If I was a whale watch operator, I would not want to see a harbor seal call, for various reasons, including self-interest. And then really, I think it's very clear that big killer whales, this increase in big killer whales that we've seen over the years is really very likely to drive seal numbers lower over time. This is a photo of a transient killer whale carrying a harbor seal. What's been interesting with the photogrammetry study, by the way, is you get because of this different perspective, seeing the animals from the air. I love Sarah's photos of bowheads in the same way. It was very interesting. You see things a little differently. And one thing that we've seen is when transient killer whales are foraging around harbor seal haulouts, it's really quite common for one or more of the group to be carrying a seal in its mouth as they're looking for more. So we see them swimming around, looking under rocks, looking at, can't eat another seal right now, but maybe later. They're really effective seal predators. So there is a call going on. You know, even if you believe in calls, these guys are doing it for us. So did I miss anything? I think that's about all I have to say on this issue, but very happy to take questions. And boy, that was a lot faster than I expected. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? And we got a few.
Nope. All good? Great.
Lance, this is Indy here.
Hi, Andy, wherever you are in the lights.
About calling the seal population, what about if you, I won't want to say this, but I have to say it, close down the Marine Mammal Rescue Center, that way there won't be seals rescued. And
Well, you know, it's interesting. Yes, yeah, I think we should close it down, Indy, Marty. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I guess I should have mentioned that I do work for the OceanWise, ultimately. I work for the Coastal Ocean Research Institute, which is part of OceanWise, which is based at the Vancouver Aquarium, and we do have a marine mammal rescue and rehab program. I don't think that the seals that we release there are really a drop in the bucket as far as the total population is concerned. I think it's a great humanitarian sort of exercise. I think it's great for developing and maintaining and training veterinary animal care staff. So if we have, over 300 transients now in British Columbia, let's say 150 of them a day are in BC at any given day, a bunch of the others are somewhere else, say that their diet's half harbor seals, that adds up to about 30,000 harbor seals a year that they're eating. And so we release, 120 or something, Marty? So we don't even feed them for a day. I think we need to augment our seal production and feed more transients. That's my take on it. But, yes.
It's for the online.
How much do the escapements from salmon farms influence the population of seals?
Well, that was a really interesting finding that was presented earlier by Chad of that Atlantic salmon in the diet of harbor seals. I can't answer that, but higher than I thought is probably the best answer. What do you think, Chad?
I thought it would be zero. Very interesting finding. The only source of Atlantic salmon. Terrifying.
And for the benefit of the camera, Chad agreed. Essentially. Larger than we thought.
Other questions? One, I can see the very back.
Oh.
One over there. Two more.
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts to whether there was validation in using like deterrent methods to maybe remove seals from certain areas that are important for smolts and things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think there can be in certain cases. I mean, one thing that I skipped over in my chart, because in the interest of time, was that you can, the kinds of culls that I'm hearing people proposing a very broad scale culls of thousands of animals. These kind of surgical removals where you say, okay, here's a particular highly endangered population of Chinook salmon. We only have 5 coming back. We've degraded the environment so the fish don't have any refugia anymore as they come back. So the puntledge would be a great case of that. In those cases, there may be times when you just have to say, okay, we've got to do something about these seals for a while and remove them or haze them or cull them, do something. So I wouldn't say I'm religious that these things could and should never be done. But as a broad scale, will that save the southern residents? No, it might save, in these very extreme and unusual cases, a specific run of salmon and give it a chance to recover.
Just with a couple things. First, how likely is the cull to actually take place? And the second part is, if there is a cull, we all reacted when we saw the bullet hole in the sea line. I think there's going to be a lot of animals that are, that they won't be killed right away, and a lot of painful deaths.
It's a good question. I don't have any more validity. My opinion has no more validity on those than anybody else in the room, I think. But you asked me, so my personal opinion is I think it's really unlikely that the culls will actually take place. This is supernatural BC. It would be a tourist disaster. It would be a very unusual, controversial measure that I just can't see happening. And so my major concern is just that. I testified, as Dave Bain is somewhere in the audience, as did Dave a few weeks ago, to the Standing Committee of the House on Fisheries and Oceans on southern resident killer whale conservation, and half the questions were about seal culls. So it's at a time when we're making some real progress in coming up with solutions, and you've seen a bunch of the talks here about this. We're going back 50 years into and spending time discussing something that we're probably never going to do, and wouldn't work anyway. So that's my main concern, I guess.
Just wondering, given how it seems like a small proportion of the seal's diet is actually the salmon, and how the heron are also apparently taking some of the younger fish. Has anybody considered possibly protecting some of those particular sections of streams where the young fish are traveling through from access to herons? I'm not asking for like a cull on herons either, but protection of some of the habitat, especially in low water seasons, to make it more of them get through.
That's a good question. Again, it's not my area of specialization at all, but I do know that there are proposals and some funding, at least one funded project, to try to increase the complexity of. I'm sure this is going on riparian habitats as well. I just don't know much about that. But in estuaries and near estuary areas, when the smoke come out of the river. I mean, the only thing that ever can keep a predator-prey system stable is when the prey have refugia, places to hide. They just never work otherwise. So if you increase the complexity, if you replant coastal vegetation, take away hard shorelines where the fish have no place to hide, then you can do a lot to increase that early marine life history survival period. So there is work being done in that area.
Thank you very much, Lance.
Yeah, you're welcome.